My father was still holding his champagne glass in the air when the music faltered. It was Saturday night, March 15th, at a renovated brick warehouse in downtown Boise. 50 guests stood beneath warm string lights, a live band playing something soft and celebratory. My sister Brooke and her fiancé, Mason Caldwell, were glowing at the center of it all. My father, Thomas Hart, co-owner of Hart & Company Real Estate, had just called her our pride for the third time in as many minutes. I stood near the edge of the room, exactly where I'd been placed. Brooke has always understood legacy, he said. Voice, steady, confident, the same tone he used at client luncheons. She represents everything this family has worked for. Applause. Glasses lifted. I had been introduced earlier as our younger daughter, Riley. No mention that I'm a paramedic with Ada County EMS. No mention of the shifts that start before sunrise or end long after midnight. Just my name briefly, like a footnote. I'm 29 years old. I have pulled strangers out of overturned cars on Interstate 84. I have sat in living rooms with grieving spouses while the sirens faded. But in that room in my navy dress, I was background. Then it shifted. My father's eyes drifted toward me. And Riley, he added with a thin smile, has chosen her own path. Chosen. The word hung there, polite and precise. A few guests turned their expressions kind but distant. The band softened even more, as if they sensed something tightening in the air. Beside me stood Evan Mercer. He wore a simple charcoal suit. No flash, no performance, just steady posture, hands loosely clasped in front of him. My parents had met him twice and decided he was nice enough, which in our family translated to not particularly impressive. My father lowered his voice slightly. She's brought a friend this evening. There it was. Not partner, not name, a friend. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I didn't move. I've had years of practice at staying still. And then, Mason's father froze. Grant Caldwell had been standing near the head table. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who filled a room without raising his voice. He was in from Spokane. For the engagement weekend, a respected figure in his own right. I'd only exchanged pleasantries with him earlier. Now his eyes were locked on Evan. The music wavered, just a half-second hitch from the keyboardist. But it was enough. Grant took one slow step forward. Evan, he said, not loudly, but clearly enough that the people closest to him turned. My father's smile faltered. His champagne glass dipped an inch. Grant didn't look at me. He didn't look at Brooke. He looked directly at the man beside me, studying his face as if confirming something important. "Is that you?" he asked. 50 guests shifted. The air changed. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. And for the first time that night, my father stopped speaking. He lowered his glass. I didn't understand what Grant recognized in that moment. I only knew that whatever it wasn't small. But this didn't start at a champagne toast in March. It started years ago in a house where legacy mattered more than listening. And if I'm going to tell you what happened when the music stopped, I need to take you back to that house first. The house I grew up in sat on a quiet street in southeast Boise. 2 stories, beige, siding the kind of place that signaled stability without ever saying the word out loud. Inside, stability had a different meaning. My parents built Hart & Company Real Estate from a 3-agent operation into one of the most recognized brokerage firms in Ada County. My father handled commercial development. My mother, Diane Hart, managed residential listings and client relations with a precision that bordered on choreography. Their office downtown had a wall lined with framed photographs, groundbreakings, ribbon cuttings, awards banquets. In almost every photo, Brooke stood beside them. Brooke is 3 years older than I am, 32 now, polished, strategic, the kind of person who learned early how to read a room and adjust accordingly. By the time she was 25, she had her broker's license and a corner desk at Hart & Company. Clients asked for her by name. At family gatherings, introductions followed a script. "This is our daughter Brooke," my father would say, hand lightly at the small of her back. "She's taking over the business one day." There was always a pause after that, just long enough to let the image settle. "And this is Riley," he'd add. "She works in emergency services." He never said I was a paramedic, never described what that meant. The long shifts, the calls at 2 in the morning, the days when you carry someone's last words home with you because there's nowhere else to put them. Emergency services sounded temporary, like something you do before real life begins. Thanksgiving was the clearest example. Every year the dining room table was set with my mother's good china. Brooke's place setting sat directly across from my father, the position of honor. Mine was at the end, closest to the kitchen, where I could stand easily when plates needed clearing. It wasn't cruel. It was consistent. Conversation followed the same pattern. Brooke would talk about closing a major deal or negotiating a difficult client. My parents leaned in, eyes bright, asking follow-up questions. My father would reference market trends. My mother would nod with quiet pride. When it came to me, the questions were practical. Still on night shifts. Are you thinking about something more stable? More stable than responding. When someone dials 911, there was one moment that settled it in my mind. 2 years ago, at the Hart & Company annual client dinner, my parents reserved a table for immediate family. Brooke sat beside my father, reviewing talking points for his remarks. I arrived straight from a 12-hour shift, hair pulled back, still carrying the faint scent of antiseptic. My father glanced at me and said, not unkindly, "You could have changed." I had changed, just not into what he meant. Later that night, as awards were handed out, Brooke received recognition for emerging leadership. My mother dabbed at her eyes. I applauded, like everyone else. No one asked about the call I had taken that morning, a rollover on Highway 55. No one asked about the elderly man whose hand I held until his daughter arrived. In our house, success had a visible form. It wore tailored jackets and carried office keys. Legacy mattered. Listening did not. By the time Brooke's engagement was announced, the script was already written. She would marry well. She would expand the business. The Hart name would continue in a direction my parents understood. And I would stand nearby, smiling grateful to be included. What my parents never noticed was that I had stopped asking to be understood a long time ago. But I hadn't stopped noticing the pattern. And neither, as it turns out, had someone else. I met Evan Mercer on a windy Thursday in late September, almost a year and a half before Brooke's engagement. It was a joint emergency response training outside Twin Falls, a long gravel lot, lined with fire trucks and county SUVs. I was there with Ada County EMS. He was part of a regional safety compliance team observing the drill. That was how he introduced himself, the first time we spoke regional safety compliance. No title, no elaboration. He asked thoughtful questions, not the kind meant to impress, the kind meant to understand. How long did we stay on scene before transferring care? What resources were typically stretched thin? What made a call spiral from manageable to chaotic? Most people asked about adrenaline. He asked about systems. After the drill, a few of us ended up at a diner off Blue Lakes Boulevard. He ordered black coffee, wore a faded flannel and a leather watch that looked old but well cared for. He listened more than he talked. When someone made a joke about government oversight slowing everything down, he didn't laugh. He just said, "Oversight only feels unnecessary when you haven't seen what happens without it." It wasn't confrontational, just measured. We started seeing each other a few weeks later. Nothing dramatic. Dinner, long walks along the Greenbelt, quiet conversations that didn't feel rushed. He lived in Boise, rented a modest townhouse near the river, drove an older SUV with high mileage and no interest in replacing it. When I brought him to my parents' house for the first time, Sunday dinner in November, my father asked what he did. "Consulting work," Evan said. "In what field?" my father pressed. "Risk assessment and safety protocols." My father nodded once, already filing him away. My mother asked if the work was stable. Brooke smiled politely and changed the subject to a commercial property acquisition. Later that night, as we drove back toward downtown, I apologized for the tone at the table. "You don't have to," Evan said. "People measure what they understand." "And what don't they understand?" I asked. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "Sometimes it's easier to underestimate someone than to ask better questions." I didn't push, but small things stayed with me. Once I noticed a binder in his living room labeled Regional Advisory Review. It wasn't flashy, just organized, detailed. When I asked about it, he said it was background prep for a meeting. "What kind of meeting?" "Routine," he said, and closed the binder gently. Another time, during a Saturday morning at a coffee shop on Broadway Avenue, he excused himself to take a call. I wasn't trying to overhear, but the name I caught wasn't casual. "Yes, Councilman," he said. "I'll have the draft ready before Monday." He returned to the table like nothing unusual had happened. My parents decided early that he wasn't ambitious enough. They didn't say it outright, but it lived in the pauses. The way my father referred to him as that young man, the way my mother asked if he planned to settle into something more substantial. Substantial meant visible, lucrative, impressive at a cocktail reception. Evan never corrected them. He never leaned into whatever authority he might have carried outside our dining room. If anything, he seemed almost careful not to. I told myself it didn't matter, that what counted was how he treated me. The steadiness, the respect, the absence of performance. But when Brooke's engagement invitation arrived in thick cream cardstock, and my mother texted to remind me about the dress code, I felt something shift. Not because of the party, because for the first time I realized my parents weren't just misjudging him. They were comfortable doing it publicly. And that comfort, I would soon learn, had been built on an assumption that hadn't been tested. 10 days before the engagement party, on Wednesday, March 5th, I stopped by my parents' house after a late shift. The kitchen lights were on, though it was nearly 9. My mother always preferred to handle event details. At the dining room table, paperwork spread in careful stacks, glasses perched low on her nose. The engagement was less than 2 weeks away, and every detail had to reflect well on the heart name. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to drop off a set of old family photos Brooke wanted displayed at the venue. I paused in the hallway when I heard my mother's voice. "Yes, that's correct," she was saying, crisp and professional. Brooke and Mason at the center table, immediate family flanking them. There was a pause. "And Riley," she continued, "table 9 will be fine, near the back exit. It's quieter there." Quieter. I stood very still. "Just standard name cards," she added. "No need for the custom gold trim." I could picture the seating chart in my head, round tables, white linens, carefully tiered by importance. Table 1 under the softest lighting. Tables 2 through 5 arranged in an arc around it. Table 9 near the hallway, leading to the service corridor and restrooms. My name placed deliberately at the edge. I stepped into the dining room before I could reconsider. My mother looked up startled for half a second, then recovered. "Riley, I didn't hear you come in." "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said evenly. "Is that the seating plan?" She adjusted the papers instinctively, covering the top sheet with another. "We're finalizing details. It's complicated with 50 guests. Table 9, I said, not accusing, just confirming. Her expression softened in a way that felt rehearsed. "It's simply logistics. We have to balance family business associates Mason's side and me." She held my gaze. "Riley, you know this evening is about Brooke." I nodded. That was the point. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just stood there, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not surprise, not even anger, recognition. The next morning, I received a digital copy of the finalized seating chart in a group email meant for family review. My mother must have assumed I wouldn't study it closely, but I did. Table 9, Riley Hart, Evan Mercer, two of Brooke's college friends who hadn't visited Boise in years. No gold trim around our names. I forwarded the email to myself and closed my phone. That evening, Evan came over. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I paid bills and folded laundry. I showed him the seating chart without commentary. He studied it quietly. "Do you want to skip it?" he asked. It wasn't pride in his voice. It was concern. "No," I said. "I want to go." "Why?" "Because if I didn't, the story would remain unchallenged. Because absence would look like guilt. Because somewhere inside me, I still wanted to see if they would hesitate before making me small in front of strangers." But I didn't say all of that. "I just do," I answered. He nodded once. No argument, no strategy. Later that night, as I washed dishes, I imagined the room at the venue. The lighting, the raised glasses, the careful introductions. My place already assigned. It wasn't the distance from the head table that unsettled me. It was how comfortable they were making the decision, and how certain they seemed that nothing would interrupt it. Saturday, March 15th, arrived clear and cold. By 6:30 that evening, the warehouse venue in downtown Boise was glowing against the dark sky, its tall windows lit from within. A valet stand had been set up at the curb. Guests in tailored coats stepped out of late-model sedans and SUVs, laughter already spilling onto the sidewalk. Evan parked a block away. He didn't say anything about it, but I noticed. It would have been easier to pull up front, hand over the keys, step into the light like everyone else. Instead, we walked the last stretch together, the air sharp against my cheeks. "You okay?" he asked as we reached the entrance. "I am," I said. It wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. Inside, the space had been transformed. White linens, soft uplighting along the brick walls, a 3-tier champagne tower near the bar. A live band tuned their instruments near a small stage. At the center of it all stood Brooke and Mason. Brooke wore a fitted ivory dress, elegant and understated. Mason stood beside her, one hand at her back. He looked proud, comfortable. My parents were stationed near the entrance, like hosts at a political fundraiser. My father's posture was perfect, his champagne glass already in hand. My mother's smile was measured warm enough to impress, but not so warm that it slipped. When they saw me, there was a flicker of assessment. "Riley," my mother said, "you made it." No hug, no comment on the navy dress I had chosen myself. "And this must be Evan," my father added, offering a brief handshake. "Good to see you again." Evan nodded politely. "Thank you for having us." Having us, as though attendance were a privilege granted. We found the seating chart near the bar, framed in gold. I scanned it once, though I already knew where to look. Table 1, Brooke and Mason, Thomas and Diane Hart, Grant and Lorraine Caldwell. Mason's parents, immediate family, center stage. Tables 2 through 5, major clients of Hart and Co. Business partners, community figures. Table 9, Riley Hart, Evan Mercer. The names were printed plainly. No gold trim. I felt something settle inside me, then not anger, not even humiliation, certainty. This was not an oversight. It was design. We walked to table 9, positioned near the hallway that led to the restrooms and the service entrance. The lighting was dimmer there, the centerpiece smaller. 2 of Brooke's former college friends were already seated chatting about flights and hotels. They smiled politely when we joined them, unaware of the layers beneath the arrangement. From where I sat, I had a clear view of table 1. I watched my father lean in toward Grant Caldwell, animated, confident. I watched my mother gesture toward Brooke with pride. I watched the gold-trimmed name cards catch the light. Evan's hand rested lightly at my back. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. I looked at him. "If I leave," I said quietly, "nothing changes." He didn't argue. Across the room, I noticed Grant again. He had turned slightly in his chair. His gaze swept the room once, then stopped. On us, not casually, not curiously, intently. He didn't look confused. He looked as if he were placing a memory. The band began to play something soft and celebratory. Guests lifted glasses. Laughter rose and fell. But Grant didn't look away. And for the first time that night, I understood that I had reached a point I couldn't retreat from. I would not shrink to make this easier. Whatever happened next would happen in the open. My father tapped his fork gently against his champagne glass at exactly 7:45. The band quieted on cue. Conversation softened and folded inward. 50 guests turned toward table 1, where the gold-trimmed name cards caught the light. Thomas Hart stood slowly adjusting the cuff of his tailored suit as though he were about to address a boardroom instead of his daughter's engagement party. "Friends," he began, voice smooth, "and practice thank you for being here tonight to celebrate something truly meaningful." Brooke smiled up at him, her hand wrapped around Mason's. My mother stood beside them, chin-lifted posture perfect. My father spoke about commitment, about legacy, about how families build not just businesses, but reputations. Brooke has always understood that, he said. From the time she was a teenager, she knew where she belonged. There was a ripple of approving laughter. She chose to invest her talents in something lasting, something that will carry the Hart name forward. Applause followed. Glasses lifted again. I watched from table 9, my fingers resting lightly around the stem of untouched water. Evan sat beside me, still and attentive. And Mason, my father continued nodding toward him. We couldn't have imagined a better match. A family that understands integrity, vision, and standards. Standards. Then his gaze shifted. And of course, he added tone, changing just slightly. Our younger daughter, Riley, has chosen a different path. Chosen again. She serves our community in emergency services, work that is admirable in its own way. In its own way. A few guests glanced toward me, polite smiles hovering. And she's brought a guest this evening. My father paused just long enough to locate us with his eyes. A friend. There was a soft chuckle from somewhere near table 4. I felt the heat rise in my chest again, but this time I didn't let it settle. I set my glass down carefully on the tablecloth. Beside me, Evan shifted slightly, But he didn't move to stand. This wasn't his moment. It was mine. I pushed back my chair. The sound was small, but in the softened room it carried. Heads turned. My father faltered for half a breath. "Actually," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even me, "his name is Evan." Silence stretched. Not dramatic, just real. My father smiled tightly. "Of course. Evan," he gestured with his glass, as if correcting a minor oversight. I didn't sit down. "And he's not a friend," I continued. "He's my partner." The word landed cleanly. My mother's posture stiffened. Brooke's eyes flicked between me and our father. Mason looked uncertain. My father's jaw tightened just slightly before he recovered. "Well," he said lightly, "we're happy you're enjoying your path." Enjoying. It was dismissal wrapped in civility. The room felt smaller now, not because of the guests, but because the line had been drawn in public. I could feel the risk of what I'd done. I had interrupted the script, corrected the narrative, in front of clients, partners, Mason's family. My father lifted his glass again, attempting to regain rhythm. To Brooke and Mason, he declared, voice louder now, "May your future be defined by excellence." The applause returned thinner this time. I sat back down slowly, my heart steady, despite the tension. Across the room, Grant Caldwell was no longer smiling. He was watching us. And for the first time that evening, my father wasn't entirely in control of the room anymore. Grant Caldwell set his glass down before anyone else did. It wasn't loud, just deliberate. My father was still holding his champagne flute, mid-air finishing his sentence about excellence, when Grant stepped away from table 1. "Thomas," he said evenly. The room didn't go silent all at once. It thinned. Conversations faltered. People sensed a shift without knowing why. Grant didn't look at Brooke. He didn't look at Mason. He looked straight at Evan. "Evan Mercer," he said, not asking this time. Evan stood. "Yes, sir." There was no hesitation in his voice. No performance. Grant studied him for a long second. Then he gave a short, almost incredulous breath. "I thought that was you." My father forced a chuckle. "You two know each other." Grant didn't smile back. "We've worked together," he said. The words landed harder than they should have. "Worked," my father repeated lightly. "In what capacity?" Grant shifted his attention, but only slightly. "Enough to include the room." "Regional safety compliance," he said. "Mercer risk and compliance." A few of the guests near tables 2 and 3 straightened subtly. That name meant something to them. My father blinked. "I'm not sure you wouldn't," Grant said, not unkindly, but not apologetically either. "Evan advises municipal contracts across Idaho and eastern Washington. Infrastructure risk assessments, liability mitigation, emergency response protocols." The band members stood awkwardly near the stage, instruments idle. And Grant added, glancing at me briefly, "He's consulted on 3 projects that intersect with properties managed by Hart and Company." I felt the room tighten. My father's smile froze in place. "I wasn't aware of that." Evan spoke then, calm and measured. "It wasn't necessary." Necessary. Grant's gaze returned to my father. "We were in Spokane last fall. Council review. You remember that, Evan, I do." My mother shifted beside Brooke, her hand tightening around her clutch. My father tried to regain footing. "Well," he said lightly, "we're all in related industries in one way or another." "That's not what concerns me," Grant replied. The room stilled. "What concerns me," he continued, "is that you just introduced him as a friend." The word hung there. "And your daughter," he added, looking now at me as if her work were a hobby. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was precise. My father's jaw set. "Grant, this is a family celebration, and families reveal themselves at celebrations, Grant said. There it was. Not a raised voice, not an accusation, an observation. Brooke's face had gone pale. Mason looked from his father to mine, uncertainty flickering across his expression. I felt the risk settle fully now. This was no longer about seating charts or phrasing. This was about reputation, publicly. My father cleared his throat. If there's been a misunderstanding, there hasn't. Grant interrupted gently. I heard what you said. Silence followed. Evan remained standing beside me. Not defensive, not triumphant, just present. For the first time in my life, the hierarchy in that room wasn't arranged by my parents. It was being evaluated by someone else. And I could see it in my father's eyes, the realization that this moment would not be easily managed. What I didn't know yet was how far he would go to regain control once the applause stopped. But I understood one thing clearly. The story had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. No one moved for several seconds after Grant spoke. It wasn't chaos. It was calculation. My father still held the microphone stand, lightly with one hand, as if deciding whether to pull it closer or step away from it entirely. My mother's expression had shifted from poised to alert. Brooke looked at Mason, and Mason looked at his father. Grant did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. I've sat through enough public reviews to recognize when someone is being minimized, he said evenly. It's rarely about facts. It's about narrative. Narrative. My father cleared his throat. Grant, I think we're reading too much into a toast. Are we? Grant replied. The question wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Evan remained standing beside me, hands at his sides. Not defensive, not triumphant, just steady. Grant turned slightly, addressing more than just my father now. Evan's firm helped restructure emergency response risk assessments after the Canyon County audit last year, he said. Municipal contracts, liability exposure. That work matters. Several guests near the center tables shifted again. I saw recognition flicker in the eyes of a developer who had once attended a Heart and Co. Me dinner. And your daughter Grant continued nodding toward me, is a paramedic. I assume she understands the real-world impact of those protocols. The word assume landed differently than chosen had earlier. My father's jaw tightened. Riley's work is admirable. In its own way, Grant repeated calmly. The echo hung in the air. My mother stepped forward, then voice measured. This is an engagement celebration. Surely we can agree to keep it focused on Brooke and Mason. Grant looked at Brooke for the first time. His expression softened briefly. This is about Brooke, he said. It's also about the family she's marrying into. And the family she's marrying from. There it was. Not an attack. An evaluation. I felt the shift inside myself too. Up until that moment, I had thought this night was about surviving humiliation with dignity, correcting a single word, holding my ground. But watching the room recalibrate, I understood something else. My parents had relied on a specific standard for years: visibility status, public alignment. They assumed those in power would measure worth the same way they did. Grant wasn't measuring that way, and the room was noticing. Evan spoke then, not to defend himself, but to clarify. I don't advertise what I do, he said quietly. That's by design. Most of my work is preventive. If we're successful, nothing dramatic happens. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father attempted a small laugh. Well, perhaps we should have had a more detailed introduction. Perhaps, Grant said. Or perhaps introductions should reflect respect before credentials. That was the first true crack. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive, but it was visible. The gold-trimmed name cards at Table 1 no longer seemed as solid as they had 20 minutes earlier. I felt my pulse steady. This wasn't about exposing secrets or humiliating anyone in return. It was about letting the standard be examined publicly. And as the band members exchanged uncertain glances near the stage, I realized something important. My father wasn't losing control because of Evan's resume. He was losing control because someone had questioned the scale he'd been using all along. The applause hadn't resumed, and neither had the music. The system had been interrupted. What remained to be seen was how far the interruption would travel once the guests went home. By Monday morning, March 17th, the engagement party felt less like an event and more like a headline that only certain people could read. Boise isn't a small town, not exactly, but the circles that matter, real estate development, city contracts, nonprofit boards, overlap in ways most people don't notice until something snaps. Something had snapped. I was coming off a night shift when my phone buzzed with Brooke's name. It was just after Tier 8. The sky over the foothills was pale, and the world had that quiet weekday momentum that makes weekend drama feel distant. But it wasn't distant. "Riley," she said the second I answered. Her voice sounded tight, like she'd been holding it together with clenched teeth. "Are you at home?" "I'm in my car," I said. "What's going on?" A breath. "Mason wants to postpone the wedding." I didn't respond right away. Not because I was shocked, because I wanted to be sure I was hearing her correctly. "Postpone," she repeated. "Not cancel, but he says he can't move forward until he understands what happened Saturday." What happened Saturday? As if it were weather. "His dad is furious," Brooke added. "Grant called Dad yesterday and said he's stepping back from a joint community initiative they were supposed to announce next month. He said he won't lend his name to people who treat family like props." I closed my eyes. Brooke kept talking faster now, and Dad's already feeling it. 2 clients called the office this morning. One of them asked, God asked if the toast was really that bad, like it's already being discussed. Who I asked. "One is the McKenna Group," she swallowed. "You know the commercial property retainers, the ones Dad's been bragging about?" I did know. Those clients had been his favorite proof of status for years. "They didn't cancel," Brooke said quickly. "Not yet, but they postponed their renewal meeting. And Diane Mom, she got taken off the Women in Business Luncheon Committee. Quietly. Just an email." I pictured my mother reading that email with her face perfectly still like a mask. Brooke's voice softened. "Riley, I didn't think it would go this far." "It will," I thought, because it always goes farther than you expect once witnesses are involved. "I'm not asking for this," I said. "I didn't call anyone." "I know," she whispered. "But it's happening anyway." After we hung up, my phone buzzed again. "Dad." I let it ring. Then Mom. I let it ring too. I wasn't avoiding them out of spite. I was avoiding the version of the conversation I'd lived through 100 times, the one where they smoothed over discomfort with polite language and expected me to accept it because it was easier. Evan met me at my apartment later that afternoon. He brought takeout and didn't ask questions until I was ready. When I told him what Brooke had said, he listened, then nodded slowly. "This is what happens when people witness the gap between how you present yourself and how you behave," he said. "It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt heavy." That night, an email came through from my father's assistant, not my father. Subject line, family meeting. No apology, no warmth, just scheduling. It was exactly what Grant had called it: narrative management. And suddenly, I understood the real stakes. If I answered that email the way they expected, they would treat this as a temporary public relations problem. If I didn't, they would call me ungrateful. Either way, someone was going to lose the version of this family that had always benefited them. The only question was whether I was willing to let it be me. The family meeting was set for Wednesday evening, March 19th. Not at my parents' house, at my apartment. That was the first condition. My father arrived 5 minutes early, which meant he had been sitting in his car rehearsing. My mother came with him. Brooke followed separately, her posture no longer polished, but cautious. Evan stayed, but he didn't sit at the table. He leaned against the kitchen counter, quiet present. I didn't offer wine. I didn't set out appetizers. This wasn't a performance. My father began the way he always did, measured, controlled. "We need to address what happened," he said. "Yes," I replied. "We do." There was no tremor in my voice this time. He exhaled slowly. "The firm has taken a reputational hit. 2 retainer contracts have been withdrawn as of this afternoon. Withdrawn, not postponed." I absorbed that quietly. Grant Caldwell had stepped down from the Joint Development Committee entirely. Mason had moved out of Brooke's condo temporarily. The wedding was officially delayed. These weren't rumors anymore. They were decisions. "I never intended to disrespect you," my father continued, "but perception matters in our world, and respect matters in mine," I said. The room stilled. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't interrupt. "You introduced my partner as a footnote," I continued. "You described my career as if it were decorative. In front of clients, in front of his colleagues, in front of 50 people. My father looked at the table, not at me. "I've spent years accepting that treatment privately," I said. "What changed was that it happened publicly." Silence. Then something I had never heard before. "I was wrong," he said. Not deflecting, not explaining. Wrong. My mother nodded quickly. We both were. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was smaller than that. Real. "I'm not asking for revenge," I said. "And I'm not interested in humiliating anyone." They both looked up then. "But this doesn't get smoothed over with a dinner invitation," I continued. "If we move forward, it's on new terms." I laid them out calmly. No public rankings between daughters. No strategic introductions based on perceived status. And if they ever spoke about my work again, it would be with the same clarity and respect they offered Brooks. My father listened. Truly listened. "You're asking us to change how we think," he said, quietly. "Yes." He sat back in his chair. The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was reckoning. Brooke spoke, then her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I don't want to get married into a family that treats one daughter as an asset and the other as an inconvenience." That was the final shift. My father nodded once. Slow, deliberate. "We will attend counseling," he said. "Not to repair our image. To repair this." He gestured between us. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was specific. Specific meant accountable. When they left, the air in my apartment felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because the rules had changed. Later that night, Evan and I sat on the balcony, overlooking the quiet Boise Street. "You okay?" he asked. I thought about the gold-trimmed name cards, the microphone, the pause before applause that never returned. "Yes," I said. "I didn't win anything, but I didn't lose myself either." And for the first time, that felt like enough. If you've ever had to redraw the boundaries in your own family, I'd love to hear how you did it. Share your thoughts below. And if this story resonated, consider following along. There's always another chapter when it comes to justice and healing.